welcome back to the Old Fashioned Breakdown podcast, a rewatch podcast for the honest TV show Mad Men. My name is Fola and I've seen the show a couple of times and look at the show from a subtextual meta point of view because I have no life.
And my name is Helen, and this is technically my first watch through, and I'm only half paying attention because I've got a new kitten and he's currently eating the floorboard. So bear with. Today's episode is The Inheritance.
Paul is excited to go on a business trip to Los Angeles, but neglects to tell his girlfriend about his plans. Pete is excited for the trip as well, but grapples with the idea of adoption. And Betty visits her father, who's suffering from dementia, and Don tags along. Yeah, The Inheritance. So we've been away for a while. A long while. It's 2 months, I think. Something like that. Is it 2 months or 3 months?
I'd say about 7 weeks.
7 weeks, okay. It's not
but it depends how long it's going to take you to edit this and put out.
It's a good point. It's a very, very good point. Right. Anyway, so I've been away for a while, trying to figure out how this show works and how this episode works. I can't make any promises that it's going to make any sense when we talk about it, but let's ease ourselves in quietly and ask Helen, what did she think of this episode? Because she might have more to say about it.
Do you know what? I'm going to be really honest.
Go on.
I thought this episode was really boring. I was like, oh, it's so like life admin. You know when you're like in lockdown and the last thing you want is to watch other people just like going about their lives and pretending everything's fine when it isn't.
Yeah.
And I was just a bit like, oh my god, and they're just complaining about everything, and I was just like, oh, for God's sake, you people don't know.
What did you think of the title, The Inheritance?
So, I mean, I don't really know what I think about that. I mean, I get it. It's very literal in some senses.
Okay.
But for me, the theme for this week was all about parenting.
Okay.
And parents and children, I would say. I think it was a fairly obvious one for me this week.
Yeah, fair enough. I totally agree. But when you say you felt the inheritance thing was quite obvious, what do you mean?
Well, the fact that none of them have inherited anything good. They're all horrible people because they've all had shitty inheritances.
Alright, fair enough.
That's what I'll say. I mean, I guess it's sort of the inheritance is like, because obviously Pete gets his lack of inheritance from his dad. Yep.
That's the thing. That happens.
But yeah, it's, I guess, what we take from our parents, isn't it?
There's a lot of that, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I thought this episode was about loads of things. I think you've kind of touched on what I thought it was about as well. Like, mainly it's about the parents and like kids and growing up and all that kind of stuff. I think this is really Betty's episode, and it's like how I think it's gone.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, and that's the other thing. I was like, oh, it felt like a really long episode because they sort of left the house.
Like ages.
It really felt like a long episode because they sort of left the dad's house and got home, and then they had the whole like conversation by the stairs about what's going on, and then fucking Glenn turns up.
There's a whole other show to go.
I'm just like, what? Creepy Glenn's back. Also, fun fact: did you know that he's played by Matthew Weiner's son?
Yes, I did.
See, I did not until I read about it and was like, why would you put your son in that role? But okay.
To be honest, I think the reason I was thinking about that, and I was thinking that maybe it's because like there's two reasons that you do something like that. One is quite a narcissistic thing where you just put in your family in the TV show, right? Which I don't think that's it. Like, I don't think it's that blatant. The other thing is you could look at it from a quite a empathetic kind of point of view, where he put his son in the show because he doesn't want anyone else to play that role, because it is kind of a creepy role, and you kind of need to be a good parent to kind of like look after a kid who's in the role like that. And also, I think there's something about the fact that it's Matthew Weiner's child, and almost the way he interacts with Betty is very as if, if you take that's a cat, by the way. If you take Don as being a version of Matthew Weiner, then Glenn is also a version of Matthew Weiner as well. So I think it's quite deliberate. So yeah, it was weird, but it's just, I think this episode was a bit kind of it was basically about Betty. It's about Betty and her and how she's growing up and how she's basically separated herself from Don. But there's loads of things within that. So like, back to the whole Lacan thing. I haven't forgotten about him. There's this thing that Lacan talks about. I mentioned it before. I'm sorry. All the rustling is the cat, literally. I think the cat thinks he's in like the jungle or something.
Do you want me to put him in the kitchen?
No.
You might cry.
No, it's fine. I'm sure he's.
I'm really sorry, everyone. It's not my fault.
I'm sure the listeners love it. We should have a picture of the cat.
Oh yeah.
Elton, by the way, that's his name. Anyway, so the episode is basically about this thing called castration. From a Lacanian point of view, right? And castration involves this idea of lack, and he's got a paper ball.
Do you want me to take it off him?
No.
He'll be so sad.
It's fine. Lack is basically, we're all, as I think we've talked about it before, where like human beings are made out of like a lack. We're always yearning for things and we always want things. And it's this kind of idea that, as we go through the episode, we'll talk about it, and I'll like try and explain it, or try not to explain it and try and avoid it. I don't know, but let's talk about Paul.
Yeah. Let's talk about Paul. I thought he was boring this episode.
You thought? Oh, I thought he was cool, man. I thought he kind of embodied this idea of lack and growing up, like, as well as anyone. Like, I think the three characters, so like Paul, actually four characters. So you've got Paul, you've got Pete, and you've got Betty and Don, and all four of them sort of like grow up in a way for the episode. I guess we could start with the first scene. So in this first scene, we see them all sitting around and they're talking, and the first thing we see is Pete reading out all those companies. And this thing, I'm going to try and talk about this, but it's really complicated. So this thing about castration is, it involves a lot of objects, and it involves a lot of like the lack of an object and stuff. So there's like different types of objects. You've got like imaginary objects, you've got real objects, and you've got symbolic objects, right? Like the real, the imaginary. And in this case, they're talking about
imaginary objects.
And I feel like this first scene is really about male privilege.
Yes.
So when you see them talking, and it's like all this stuff about them going on this holiday, and it's like it's almost like Pete and Paul are like the favorite sons, right? And
yes, very much.
And then at one point, I think someone says something about a fantasy. It's like it's our fantasy or something, and Sal says it's our fantasy too, in terms of like him and Peggy. And like, Sal's the gay guy and Peggy's the woman, and it's kind of like all this stuff just seems to be kind of heaped up onto the two straight guys in the company. And I feel like a lot of this episode revolves around that as well, this idea of privilege and like who inherits like the objects in life, or the
opportunities
in life. Yeah, so I thought it was there's loads of stuff in that first scene, and I couldn't quite nail all of it. So there's like stuff about Beverly Hills and Pasadena, which I kind of had a look around, but I couldn't really get my head around properly. Did you have any thoughts on that scene?
No.
Too busy feeding the cat.
No, I wasn't. I did watch it, but again, I was like, they're just talking about going on a business trip in exactly the kind of way I would imagine that they would talk about going on a business trip.
Did you see the way that Peggy was talking about getting the autographs, and like how Pete was like, "Oh, I'll get you an autograph for the thing," and it was like this whole thing as well of like how Pete is sort of like rushing in there to be the hero and sort of like help her out.
It's funny because I think there is an interesting development with the whole Peggy Pete thing in this episode.
Okay, alright.
And I think what's interesting about this scene and the scene with Don in the office is that you're right, they're set up almost like a sort of family. Now you said favoured children.
Yeah.
I would say possibly naughty children. And she's
really?
like, she's almost like the little sister in this though, isn't she? She is very much like the good little sister.
She is very good,
and you know, even to the point where sort of Don sort of goes, "Did you read anything that she wrote?" And they have the, they do look a bit like, "No, we didn't." But you know, it is that whole thing of she's sort of like, you can see she sort of looks up to them at this point, and then by the end it's like, But anyway,
that's a very good point. I did not notice that. But there was something you said there that I think we'll return to at some point. But yeah, that's a really good point. There's also the bit where Don's talking about these clients and how to treat them and stuff, and it is very much like as if he's talking about seducing women and sort of like how you kind of treat them and how you sort of like talk to them and stuff, which I found really interesting. But yeah, so that's I guess so that sets everything up. So that tells us where three of our main characters are. So we've got Paul and Pete going on this holiday, and Don staying behind like the as if he's the father, kind of sending them off, sort of thing. And then the next time we see Paul is when he meets Sheila in the office, which I loved. I love the beginning of the scene. I don't know if you noticed it. There's like a really weird thing where you see Sheila walk into the office, and you see I can't remember her name. One of the secretaries walking at the same time. I can't remember. She doesn't introduce them, but when Sheila meets Paul, and like I think Paul kisses her on the cheek, you see her in the background, and she just rolls her eyes, or she just looks like with disgust, and just like
really, yeah. I didn't notice that.
Yeah, it's really subtle. So I think that's kind of interesting that we get that sort of thing. But yeah, did you have anything to say? I mean, this is where Pete basically puts his foot in it and like uncovers the fact that Paul's going on this trip and he hasn't told his girlfriend. Did you have any thoughts on that?
No. I'm sure you do though.
Well, funny you should say that. This goes on for ages, this scene, and it's really, I think it really shows up Sheila as, and it shows up Paul as well, because we kind of know that Paul's a bit of a, what's the word? I guess he'd be called a SJW, you know. He's very performative about how, like, what he's doing, and he wants to be seen doing all these kind of like good things for worthy causes and stuff, and showing off his kind of like intelligence and all that kind of thing. And I think it's interesting when they talk, Paul says something, and you see Joan walk past. When he mentions LA, Joan walks past.
Oh yeah. And
LA is kind of like a weird word. Like, you know how the show kind of uses words to mean for other meanings and stuff like that. Anytime LA comes up, it's usually used in terms of like another woman at the end of a relationship, or another woman's involved in the scene or something like that. And I do get this sense, like in this scene, that Paul is maybe not wanting to break up with Sheila as such, but like he's very torn about the idea of he's worried about settling down. Like, I put the theme as like responsibility and sort of like running away from responsibility, and you know, so he kind of like drags her away, and then he starts talking to her, and they talk about going to Mississippi and how it's gonna, you know, he's scared of like bullets, and he's scared of getting shot, and he's scared of like people screaming and shouting and stuff. And to me, it sounded very much like being in like almost like a shotgun wedding sort of thing. Like it's almost like they're talking about marriage in a way. And he's kind of like terrified of settling down, terrified of growing up, basically. And so he kind of like makes all these kind of like excuses. And one of the things that Sheila says to him is, "Why won't you talk to me about it?" And I like this line. Paul says, "It's a convention. We're not allowed to talk about it." And I like the idea, like the double meaning of that, where, you know, they are going to a convention, but at the same time, the idea of talking about feelings is a convention, especially at that time and that period. And then they go into the lift, and they see Hollis in there. Do you have any thoughts about that? Because
Well, I mean, this is the thing with Paul, is I feel like he doesn't really know what it is that he wants. And I think, because I mean, my thoughts on it is that he doesn't, I don't get the sense that he loves Sheila.
Yeah.
I don't get that at all. I think, I mean, I did pick up on the breaking up, but I do question why he is with her. And I also think that he's very much like a, he's got two different masks on in this episode, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And he sort of like can't quite juggle between the two.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a horrible scene because of, I mean, the supermarket quote in particular is pretty brutal.
I think I don't. So you say horrible. I just think it's funny. I think Paul looks really pathetic in this scene. What do you mean by horrible?
Well, I mean, it's not a very nice thing to say to someone, is it? Like, oh, you can work at any
Yeah,
supermarket.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Like, do you know what I mean? It's like that's because he's kind of going, oh, I can't just walk into another ad agency, but you can work in any supermarket, as if to say, like, I mean, it's a horrible comment.
As if her job's kind of like
Well, it's not even that. It's just like, it's almost like him saying to her, "That's the best you're ever gonna do."
Right. Yeah. I guess. It's good.
And it's almost like because of the time that they're in, that's sort of, I guess, normal.
Yeah, it's true.
But seeing it at this, in 2021 is fucking terrible.
Yeah.
But at the time, even the thing where, because there's a whole thing about the names as well, isn't there? Because what does he? Isn't there like they say some stuff about names, like, and he pretends that doesn't he say something to Hollis where he's like,
well, he does talk to Hollis. I'll get to that.
but that's it. Like, I don't know. I feel like he's a coward.
Right. Okay.
Like,
okay.
He's a coward, and he doesn't know what to do, and he's making it everyone else's problem. And the thing is, the business trip is the easy way to get out of.
Well, yeah.
But even the business trip, like, even with the whole, like, Don saying to him, like, he does all the talking.
Yeah.
Totally.
It's
like he can't really be trusted.
Yeah, totally. I think, totally. I get that. So I saw it more that, he doesn't want to go to Mississippi. Like I said, it's like this whole idea of responsibility and taking responsibility and maturity, and he doesn't want to do that. So instead of just saying it and being honest, he kind of like hides behind this whole thing of, I've got to go on this trip and I have to do this. But why I keep laughing at this scene is the way he keeps looking at Hollis as if to say, like, A, look at my girlfriend, and B, can you believe this shit? And it's kind of, so there's this thing, like, so I'll talk about this idea of lack, right? And I'm trying to work out how I'm going to explain it. There's three types of lack, right? You've got symbolic castration, you've got imaginary castration, and you've got real privation, right? And they involve like three different types of father, right? Or three different agents. So three different like sort of members of the family, or three different people that the subject is reacting against. You've got the real father, you've got symbolic mother, and you've got the imaginary father. The point I'm trying to make is that Hollis, Hollis in this scene is what Paul sees as the imaginary father. And
what? So he's like looking to him to see, am I doing this right?
Exactly. He's still like almost like looking up to him. Look what I've got, kind of like, and also Sheila is. This is gonna sound weird, but Sheila is to Paul a symbolic phallus. Like, she's something that he's got hold of. He's like, look, and he's like, look what I. Do you know what I mean? He's showing it off. It's kind of like this thing that he has control over, and he has hold of. I find that really interesting. I just find that fascinating, and that the idea of the different types of lack is all the way through this episode. So then we don't see Paul again for ages and ages and ages. There's one more thing I want to talk about in that scene. So at the end, he sort of asks, like, why can't it wait? And then we see that, and we'll talk about it later, but then we jump to this scene with Pete and looking at his mother's assets. But we'll talk about that later. It's interesting how the two scenes kind of mirror up to each other. And then we see Paul. Next time we see Paul is when he's told he can't go to LA. In a scene where everybody's laughing and joking.
Yeah, where Joan comes over and is like, "Give me a ticket."
Yes, yeah. You got anything to say about that?
What, that entire scene or just that bit?
Well, I guess we can go through the whole scene. If you remember the scene. Do you want me to...
No, I remember it. I mean, they give him a Playboy and...
No, so this... So that scene's split into 3 parts. So we've got the Playboy bit at the beginning.
Oh, it's all merged into one scene in my brain.
And then we've got the... So in the bit I'm talking about is where we come back to the scene and we see... what's his name? Talking to... we see Harry saying that he could go on this trip if he, when he... in a few months, and he's kind of like, I can go whenever I want. And we see Hildy kind of like tell...
yeah, that was weird.
Hildy tell Harry that she's really happy for him. Basically, this scene's basically about rejection and how people respond to rejection. So everyone's kind of like, Harry's kind of like making excuses for the fact that, hey, I can go anytime, it's fine. But he also makes this Freudian slip where he says, I need to shave my face. Do you remember that?
No.
He says like, I have to go up there, but I have to, so I can shave my face. Sorry, show my face, and it's almost like I think the implication is that he kind of, the reason he's not going is basically because he's too junior, and they don't trust him with that. And then we've got the whole thing with Hildy where she's like, she's saying all this stuff about how she's really happy. And what did you think of that, by the way? If anything.
I mean, I think it was just quite sad.
So I think this is, to me, it's like this idea of when we do get rejected, we deal with it. We put on a brave face. So when people are dealing with rejection, an extreme in general terms of dealing with rejection, is to turn to coping mechanisms.
Mm-hmm.
I won't say specifically alcohol. Alcohol's one of the things, but like coping mechanisms in general. And in the scene previous, Joan says to Don, "I'll keep the drunks away." And Joan in that scene, and we'll talk about it later, is very much like she's very maternal in that scene. She's like she's very much like a mother. So I thought that was really interesting. But we're not talking about him. We're talking about Paul. And Paul kind of gets told that he's not going on this trip. And he looks absolutely distraught. He's just like absolutely gutted about it. I just think it's really... And the fact that everybody's laughing at him as well. So one of the things about laughter is like... I think there's a lot of laughter in the show. And it's always used in these really sort of... Like I said, I think I said it last episode... that laughter seems to be used a lot to cover up really sad situations. And I think you could consider that the sad situation is always something to do with lack. It's always to do with this idea of lack and this kind of idea of nothingness and how to fill that with something kind of quite... Why are you laughing? Oh, it's just a cat. So Paul puts on a brave face and he ends up sort of leaving. When he goes to go and speak to Sheila, right? And he's saying all this stuff to Sheila. He's talking to her about he's having this like really sort of weird conversation because you never actually see, we know Sheila's available to shoot and she can be in the show and stuff, but we never actually see her face. We just see everything from Paul's point of view. I thought that was really interesting.
What do you mean we never see her face?
Well, when he's on the phone to her.
Oh yeah.
And they're having the conversation. We never see what she's saying. We never see anything from her point of view. And to me, it's like that whole scene to me was like really about the selfishness of Paul and how he's just kind of like not necessarily selfish, but like now he's been rejected and he sort of rushed to Sheila as a way of dealing with the rejection, dealing with this idea of lack. So like he doesn't have...
Is it though, or is it Because the thing is, he was more bothered about losing his job before, from the way he was talking to her. He was like, I can't just walk into another ad agency.
But he was lying.
Well, yeah, but she doesn't know that. You're assuming that she knows that, and she doesn't. From her point of view, he's basically going, I have to do this for my job. That's he's sacrificing.
Yeah.
And he hopes that she'll understand that. But then it's almost like he then suddenly it puts him in a heroic position, I suppose.
Yeah.
And then he finds out that he's not going, and rather that he's saving face, isn't he? Because then he's like, do you know what? I could just ring him up and say, oh, I can come now.
Yeah, he's totally doing.
But he's
yeah.
doing it.
He's doing both, I think.
Yeah, totally.
I think he's being like trying to be heroic and he's trying to be.
You're laughing now. It's not me.
Because he's going nuts. Yeah, he is trying to be. He's trying to be heroic and stuff, but at the same time, I think that's the heroicness is just a cover up for the fact that he feels rejected, which we will come back to later on in another story.
But what the point that I was trying to get at was that Paul doesn't want to be left with nothing. That's the point that I'm trying to make. Is it's like if it had come down to it, and she'd said, right, it's either your job or me. At the point with the trip, he probably would have chosen the job.
You think?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh yeah. No, I agree.
And the fact is, he can't. If he loses both, he's got nothing.
Yeah.
So it's that whole thing of it's self-preservation, I guess, more than he's because then obviously the next scene we see him, he's on the bus, and he's like bragging, isn't he?
But that's the thing, on that bus, do you think he looks happy?
Well, no, but he's making himself feel important.
Okay.
I would say that.
Okay. Because I would have... I guess you're right.
You think he looks happy on the bus?
No, I don't think he looks happy at all. I don't think he wants to be there. I think he's talking on this bus about Marx, which is really... I don't really want to go too far into that, but like he's basically talking about Marx. And like Marx, I don't really want to talk too much about it. Marx deals a lot with human beings and commodification of human beings and all that kind of stuff, right? I don't fully know. You're nodding, so I think I'm on the right track. And he says, I think the last thing Paul says is, the consumer has no color. Yeah. And I think that's like a weird thing to say, and I think he's saying it in a sort of like positive way, as I see no color and all that kind of stuff. But I think the point the show's trying to make is that color is a person's lack, right? So the point of lack is you kind of have to appreciate that you've got it, because if you don't appreciate you've got it, then you don't have a personality, because we all have a lack, but everybody's lack is a different thing. So you could be missing something in your life, and the life that you live is trying to fill this lack with whatever. So whatever your job is, whatever your way of dealing with art is, whatever the thing that you look for defines who you are as a person. And by saying that the consumer has no color, you're saying that people of color can't use that idea of being different as something that sets them apart. And it's weird because I know that like there is the idea of color can set people back and it gives people a disadvantage, but if you're working towards improving that advantage, it gives you, it's like, let's say for instance black comedians, right? Black comedians have like a specific thing that they can talk about because they're black, to the point where you'll see a lot of people who aren't black, let's say straight white men, who are kind of, a lot of their act is about complaining that they don't have anything to talk about, or that, I don't have a thing, sort of thing. And I think by taking that away from a person, that sort of unique thing about them away from them, you're losing what's special about the person. I think that's kind of that's why Marx comes
But that's advertising though, isn't it? It's about selling.
Yeah.
And I think even in modern day, it's that, representation is a whole thing. It's a whole we could go on about representation for a really long time.
Yeah.
And, you know, you get to the point where you think, oh, you can take like a female clothing brand, and they'll just say, right, we'll have one black model and one white model, and that's fine then, because we're representing. But that's the thing is there's so many other things. And also, it is just like that whole thing is you can't just put someone in that situation. Like, it's like, I mean, the other thing, you know, obviously there's like able-bodied people and non-able-bodied people. And then there's the body positivity movement, which is obviously bigger women. And everyone wants representation. But by representing everyone, you're really representing no one.
Right, okay. I see what you mean.
Because it's like you're almost back to the point where it's kind of like because it's representing everyone, people don't have anything to say about it.
That's what I mean. I'm not talking about representation as such. I'm talking about that thing that's unique about you. That's the lack. It's not the idea that you're representing everyone. It's more I think it goes deeper than just these guys on the bus. I think it's more about how the lack inherent with all of us is our greatest strength, even though and we shouldn't be trying to hide it and pretend it's not there.
Yeah, no, agreed.
Using it to kind of announce ourselves to the world in a sort of way, which is kind of why people are kind of, you know, the idea of being proud of yourself and being sort of like saying, this is who I am and this is my sort of contribution to the world sort of thing. I think when he says consumer has no colour, it's kind of, it negates all that. It kind of takes that away. There's other things as well in that scene, but like and I guess the other thing I'd say about it is that's kind of the fact that he's on this bus is kind of on this bus full of these people, and he doesn't want to be there. It's that idea of him people pleasing as well, where he's got to that point by not saying who he is, by not sort of like saying, I don't want to go on this trip and I want to do you know what I mean? He's hidden himself, and he's ended up on this bus that he doesn't want to be on as part of this homogenous group of people, and it's like that. I think that's what he's saying. Do you know what I mean? I think that's why the whole Marx thing comes up. Anyway, we got there in the end. So that's Paul's story. Shall we do Pete's story now as well?
Sure.
Okay. So the first time we see Pete outside of the office is when him and Trudy are having a chat.
How about kids and the bad?
Kids, yes. So what did you think of that?
Well, we know she's the problem. Does she know she's the problem?
Yeah, she does. Yeah, they had a massive fight about it, remember?
Okay. It has been like 2 months.
I know it's been a while.
I don't remember everything. But okay, fine. So she wants to adopt.
Yeah.
He's less bothered about adopting.
Well, it's not just that. I mean, I guess the whole scene is the fact that Trudy wants to.
He really wants to come out.
Do you want to let him in?
Yeah.
So we should talk about how the scene sort of goes along. So it starts off with Trudy coming into bed, and she's like trying to get Pete to take her away to this.
On the trip, yeah.
And Pete's like, no, you can't come because, you know, I've got
they won't take me serious. Yeah, because she's there.
So he basically, as with Paul at the end of the last scene, he basically rejects her, and she kind of has to find something else. So she decides to go with her parents. And yeah, I guess I don't really want to go into what I think that's privation again, but I don't really want to spend too long on it. But I think that's really interesting, and I liked how this scene ended, with
her saying, "You love me, and I'm not. I haven't got the same blood as you." Or whatever.
Yeah. Because I think a lot of this show as well, this episode is about identification and how, you know, love and identification are very similar things. Like how you identify with certain people, and how you sort of like take on the traits of those people, and then you don't identify with other people and the reasons why. And I think that's kind of what that's hinting at that in in that scene. So the next time we see Pete is when him and Bud are discussing their mother's assets.
What? How she doesn't have any?
Yeah.
And Pete's like, can we just get it back from the Lincoln Center or whatever? Can we just ask for the donation back?
Yeah. And they do that thing about rope. They talk about this film Rope.
Yeah, I didn't get that.
So the film Rope is basically about two guys that kill this weak person just because they can, and then they go to jail for it. And it's been like sort of like made into like loads of different types of films and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, it's about these guys. So the film Rope is about these guys, Leopold and Loeb, and it's come up before in the show. It's another thing about identification. It's like people being bonded together in groups because, you know, they go through a hardship or they got a secret or stuff like that. What did you think about this scene? If you remember anything.
Well, I recall they've already mentioned that the father had no money, haven't they?
Yeah, so that's got no money.
I don't know why they weren't. Why were they that surprised?
Well, no, actually, no, they didn't. Oh, they did. I guess they did. They weren't really surprised. They were just kind of like. I think it was more the fact that if he didn't squander away all her money, and it's kind of interesting how this scene links up with the scene with Sheila earlier on, where Paul says, "Why can't it wait?" And then it kind of cuts to this, and it's almost like, to me, it kind of made me think about the fact that it's almost like if it waits, if it's like if Sheila's in, if it waits, then Paul kind of takes over the relationship, and Paul kind of obviously is irresponsible, cannot look after this relationship, and doesn't really know what he's doing, doesn't really want to be doing it. And that's kind of how Dot and her husband, or Pete's parents, ended up in the situation they're in, because obviously the idea is that Pete's dad was really irresponsible with money and wasn't a grown up and wasn't mature enough and didn't know how to deal with it and stuff. So yeah, I think that's really cool. This the thing that stands out to me the most about this scene is the fact that it's almost like there's a bit where Bud is talking and Pete talks about this idea of adoption and stuff.
He says people do that.
Yeah. But what's really interesting is up until that point they've been, you know, they're kind of, you know, it's like sibling rivalry sort of thing. But I think when Pete tells Bud that he's thinking about adoption, Bud's really kind of empathetic to that, and that's kind of it's one of the three types of identification that you have. There's three different types of identification. The first part is you mourn the loss of your birthright. The second part is you move on, and the third part is you become quite empathetic. Mm-hmm. And that's what happens in the scene. Anyway. the next time we see Pete is when we see him with, because you know all that stuff about identification is basically what happens the next time we see him with his mother. But he doesn't identify with his mother, he identifies with his father. Did you get that?
Yes.
Right, okay. Because what happens is they're talking, and Dot is really sort of like, well, first of all, Bud is very much, you know, you were talking earlier about how Peggy was the little Miss Goody Two Shoes and sort of like doing all the right things. That's a phenomenon known as the ideal ego. And it's kind of like the person that acts, you know, is the good person that does everything that you'd want and sort of like does the right thing all the time. That's kind of what Bud is doing. Problem with being the ideal ego is it's like offering yourself up to a person to be the phallus for them. It's like, and you end up getting used. You end up sort of like just being sort of tending to someone else's needs. And that's basically what Peggy does at the beginning of the show. She doesn't actually get rewarded for anything. And it's also what happens here in this scene with Dot, Bud, and Pete, where Bud is being like the good boy, and he's kind of like, he's making sure his mom's got everything, and he's like speaking for her mom, and he's doing all this stuff, and he's like standing by her side. And Pete is really kind of Pete's just being a tearaway, basically. He's being like this cat. He's he's basically being a dick.
Aww, Elton, you're not a dick.
And
You've upset him now.
And yeah, I like that. I think that's really really cool. Do you remember anything from that scene?
What, the scene with the mum?
Yeah.
Just about her being really snooty about adoption.
Yeah.
Like I say, I feel like for me this episode was quite dull. I was just sort of like, oh.
So is that hard?
I feel like it's particularly when we talk about Betty, I'll probably remember a bit more because it was more interesting.
Okay.
But the rest of them, it was like watching them go to a meeting, then watching them go to like sort out someone's finances after they died. I'm like, seriously, it's so fucking boring. I was like, don't care about any of this.
I got a question. Is this where you noped out the first time?
Possibly around here, yeah. It probably is, Because I was like watching it, just thinking it's like watching paint dry sometimes. Oh my god! I hope it gets better. I hope it gets more interesting again. Do we get to see them in LA next week?
Well, maybe you did. If you don't know, then you probably did know part at this point.
Yeah.
You probably never remembered that.
I glossed over the last few episodes, to be honest.
And all right, so we'll skip that part then. But basically, that part was about Pete. So I like the end of the scene where Pete just kind of walks out, and it's like, I like the end of the scene where Pete walks out, and Bud says he'll send him the things, and like Pete's just like, yeah, you do that, and he's like bossing the whole thing. There's all stuff about his mum, sort of like saying she should have known about stuff, and obviously Pete's now it's almost like Pete's like the dad of the whole family and stuff. And the next time we see Pete is when he's talking to Peggy. Now, you've got to have something good to say about this.
Oh, yeah. I mean, first of all, she looks great. Like that little gingham number. Ooh, Peggy. I mean...
What did you think that Pete was trying to do in this scene?
That's a great question. I feel like he wanted Peggy to side with him.
Yeah. I think he was looking at Peggy. I think he was trying to identify with Peggy. Like in the same way. So like if you look at his arc for the whole show, it started off with him essentially telling his wife to go away. And then also telling his mother to go away. And then at the end trying to, connect to Peggy. As if like Peggy's got some sort of special thing. Like he's almost scared to show his wife his vulnerable side. Like, why isn't he telling his wife all this stuff? And he obviously can't tell his mum because, he's kind of is a bit pissed off with her at the moment. So he's kind of the only person he's got to turn to, the only female figure. It's almost like...
But the thing is, he can trust Peggy because Peggy kept a secret.
That's true. That is true.
And I think he trusts her, and I think that's why he can say it to her, because...
That's a really good point.
Even though, like, he doesn't know the half of it, but she never told anyone about what happened between them.
That's true.
And then also, he still sort of does... Like, I mean, he said he'd get her an autograph and all that. He does have a kind of caring sort of attitude towards... Not always. Sometimes he's a dick. But I think their relationship is as such that he still has feelings for her.
But I think it's the same thing as the whole rejection thing, isn't it? With the other two characters, where they run towards the person that they can...
Got an audience.
They run... Stop staring at me. I'm not very happy with you. In fact, just stand there and don't move.
Captivated.
It's the idea of the characters that sort of get rejected or sort of have nowhere to go. They go to the person that they trust the most. So, Paul runs back to Sheila when things aren't going right for him, and Pete goes back to Peg. You're right about the whole thing that they've had this relationship. They've kind of shared this It's almost like, back to that idea of lack, without going too deep into it, it's like at one point, I'm not trying to be rude, at one point they filled each other's lack, right? They kind of they identified with each other, and because of that, they have this weird bond where they don't actually like each other, but they can still talk.
But I think he does. I think he's threatened by her sometimes, and I think he likes her sometimes. And I think in this instance, I think he's not in front of everyone else because he's got that sort of like, I'm the husband, I'm the son that's going to sort this out. I'm the good one. And with her, she knows, she's seen his. Yeah. And I think he's able to show her his vulnerability.
That's a good way
through subtext, because he never says to her, I'm scared of flying. He says, oh, my father died on a plane.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what he's getting at. And then he hints, he doesn't tell her I'm unhappy. He very much hints at his unhappiness.
That's true.
And she understands what he means. He just doesn't know how much she understands and that makes her, I think, a little bit resentful towards him.
Well, she does say, he does say at one point, so me and my brother are, what does he say? Me and my brother turned out fine. And he's saying it in a very sort of ironic, kind of sarcastic kind of way. But the look on Peggy's face is very much as if he's bragging.
Yeah.
Which I thought was really cool. But so when you say he's sorry, what did you say again?
he's showing her vulnerability.
Yeah, so the vulnerability thing, I think that's a great way of putting of describing lack. It's your vulnerable side. It's the thing that's missing in you. It can be something that you can be scared of, or it can be something that you can take on and use as a definition of who you are. The scene ends with Pete telling Peggy that everything's easy for her.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting, where she says it's not easy for anyone, because everyone has vulnerabilities, right? And everyone has a lack, as we keep saying.
But it's but this is the whole thing, though, isn't it? Is that every single character in this episode has vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
And has them. They're quite obvious vulnerabilities, but still nobody will. Everyone puts up a front the whole time.
Yeah.
Everyone's constantly. It's only when like Don and Betty are alone that they actually, they can be some sort of authentic.
Well, I don't know if that's the thing. I don't know if Betty. Well, I guess she is, because we'll talk about that later. But not yet. It's interesting that Betty does get very vulnerable at one point. But anyway, yeah. But it's interesting how they end the scene with Peggy and Pete, where Peggy just tells Pete, have a great trip, in a very sort of, really sort of not really attached kind of way, like she doesn't really care. And I think that's kind of interesting, because it's like the fact that he's able to open up to her and tell her all this stuff and she doesn't get affected by it. I don't know if that's a bad thing for him. I think he kind of appreciates that. Like it's just the fact that he can tell someone that they don't freak out.
But I don't think she is in a position where she can. I don't think she shows vulnerability in the episode. I don't think she does, and I think the reason for that is because she's not in a position where she can really. Yeah. I mean, he's there going, oh, adoption, woe is me, or I'm going on a plane, woe is me. Like, she's had an illegitimate child.
That's true,
and then she's never gonna, she's never had an opportunity to go on a plane.
That's fantastic.
So it's like, it's her armour still up, because she's not gonna go, oh, I'm really sad that I'm not gonna get to do those things, because she's trying to be where Pete is already.
Yeah, true.
And it's like she can't show that she's weak, because she's already, Don's already like given her a little bit of a like, haven't you guys looked at what she wrote?
Yeah.
Like all that kind of stuff. She's trying to prove herself.
Yeah.
And I think she won't show her vulnerability for that very reason.
That's a good point.
Whereas I think he's sort of where he's sort of going on his trip, and he's got
everything.
He's got everything, and he's complaining about it.
Exactly. It's really weird. But yeah, I think we leave Pete there. So we should go into the final story. Well, not the final. This is the second to last, I guess.
Okay.
So Betty.
Oh, okay.
Basically, what I'm talking about. The one that you came for.
The one that made the episode bearable.
The main attraction.
Yeah.
So where do we start with this? I guess we start this when she phones Don.
Yeah, with the phone call.
So you're talking about vulnerability. She's able to be vulnerable with Don.
But is she, or is she needs him to put up the front?
What do you mean?
Well, she needs Don to put up the front. So when she goes back to see her family, he's with her.
Ooh, I don't know. I read that scene totally different. So I read that scene in the same way that, when Pete's talking to Peggy, he's basically saying all this stuff to her, and she's basically taking it all in and going, "You'll be fine." And then he kind of feels, but like, actually, we didn't talk. There's one thing we didn't tell you about Pete. At the end of the episode, Pete's asleep, like chilled out, relaxed on the plane, happy, right?
Oh yeah.
So it's almost like him talking to Peggy has kind of like allowed him to.
I mean, you say that, but he's got an eye mask on.
Yeah.
So it's almost like he can't look.
He can't see. This is true, but he's also asleep.
How do you know he's asleep?
I don't know.
Can't see his eyes.
You can't see his eyes. I'm gonna. In order for me to make this narrative, I'm gonna say he's asleep. Right?
Fine.
I'm gonna assume he's asleep, and he's like peaceful and he's happy because he's had this chat with Peggy, and it's almost like a therapy thing, right? And so Betty phones up. I think Betty phones up Dawn because she just wants to unload and get really upset and get really worried about her dad. She doesn't want anything from him. In fact, he says, like, "I'll come and I'll do all this stuff for you." And she's at the end of the call, she's really kind of like, oh, "God, if you have," she seems as exasperated about it to me. You don't agree?
I mean, I don't know. I feel like she could, if she didn't want him to go, she'd just say no.
I think she did, though. I think she said to him, she keeps saying no. She keeps saying, like, you don't have to worry about it. And he just says, he literally doesn't listen to anything she says. He wants to save the day. He wants to be the hero. And he's kind of like, "I'll be there in the morning." And he just turns up. So he comes along.
But, I mean, all right, fine. But then look at Betty's episode where she just wants to be rescued.
Which one's that?
I mean, that's the whole thing with Glenn, isn't it? I mean, that's the whole reason.
We'll get to that.
But this is what I'm saying, is this is a typical example of Betty tricking someone.
I don't think she's tricking him, though. I think she wants to be on her own. I think
if she wanted to be on her own, then she could have been on her own.
But
she didn't.
Okay, so that's another point. I don't think it's that clear cut where she definitely does want to be on her own. I think she clearly she wants to be on her own because she told him to leave and she doesn't want to live with him. But I feel like he's kind of like trying to get back in there.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
And she has a difficulty telling him no.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And this idea that she's kind of sort of unstable in her thinking, I think, goes the whole way through the episode. And at the end, it's kind of resolved. But we'll sort of talk through it as we go, right?
Okay.
Okay. Don't worry, I'm not tricking you. You seem really suspicious. So the next time we see them is... I guess the next time we see them is...
When we get to the house, isn't it?
Don says I just wanted to say something about the lights that they have on in the... Actually, I won't even bother with that.
The lights that they have on?
There's a symbol about the lights. But
oh, jeez.
So the next time we see them is when they turn up at the house. And I found this scene really hard. This scene is probably the reason it took so long to get through this show. Because it doesn't seem to have a specific theme to me, I don't think. Apart from the fact that Betty's kind of, in the scene to me, Betty is kind of almost being given this role of being the mother and she doesn't want it. She's kind of, she wants to be the daughter. She wants to be like looked after and all this kind of stuff. And she doesn't want to be the caring person. I don't know, did you get that? Or am I making that up in my head?
I mean, yeah, I think you get the whole way through that she wants to be the daughter.
Yeah.
But I think, for me, this scene, and similarly with, to a point, Pete's scene, and even the concept of adoption, is I think it's more about, like, how well do you actually know your parents? How well do you actually know what's going on with them?
Okay.
And because I think the big thing is, oh, he's had another stroke. And she's like, there was one before.
Yeah.
And I think it's that whole thing of, she doesn't know that. She acts like she's sort of daddy's little angel, but actually she doesn't know.
They haven't told her anything. Yeah, that's what I mean. It's like things like that came out of the blue for me. I didn't really know how it all fit in with the rest of the episode. I think there's something about him having two strokes and not. It reminds me a lot of what's his name? Roger having 2 heart attacks. And I think when I think about Roger having 2 heart attacks, I think a lot about existentialism.
Right.
And you notice how quiet it is. And
I told you he'd tire himself out.
And the thing about I think this is like, I think the point is, for me, the reason that comes up is the fact that for Betty this is like a big deal. Like this is a big point in her life. It's like the idea that so to bring up the lights again, when they come in, Betty turns on the light and
she says we're supposed to keep it dark, isn't she?
yeah, she turned and Gloria turns the light off, and that reminds me of the song "Don't Think Twice, It's Alright" by Bob Dylan.
Right.
And it was used at the end of the final episode in the first season, right? And the whole song is about how it's the end of this guy's relationship, and he's like, don't turn the light on for me now, it's too late, and all this kind of stuff. And it's almost like she's turning the light, in reference to that song, her turning the light on is like her sort of like calling her father back, because she's left Don and she wants some other father figure to look after her. Mm-hmm. So she wants to be this daddy's little girl sort of thing. And I think this whole first scene is about that, and it's also about how the fact that Don can't play that role. So if you watch the whole scene, Don is really useless in the scene. Mm-hmm. Like he doesn't know what to say. He doesn't like. And at the end, they talk about the turnpike and whether you took the turnpike. And like for me, it's like Don keeps trying to get into the conversation. He keeps trying to say stuff like like a turnpike, but all these other people are sort of like taking over and like getting in front of him and stuff. So I kind of like that. I thought that was really cool. And then we move on to the next scene with them two, where we see Peggy I think it's her mother's bedroom. I'm not entirely sure. It's like the study or something.
Betty.
Did I say Peggy?
Yeah.
Oh God. We could go into the next scene where Betty is in the study or the mother's bedroom. Is it the bedroom?
I don't know. I don't remember what happens in the scene.
Well, she's staring at a picture.
Is this the bit with like, where's the missing vase or whatever?
Yes,
yeah.
The symbolic vase, yeah. So she's staring at this picture, and then what's his name? Her brother comes in. William comes into the bedroom through the window, and it's all, for me, like William in this scene. William's kind of. I think this is like William's castration, right? So this is like about how William is, how we talked before about how, he's the good son. He's the one who does everything that everybody wants him to do. He's the one that stayed at home. He's the one that looked after mum and dad. He's the one, he's a dutiful son. But he doesn't have any, this idea that some people are kind of the phallus, and some people own the phallus. Mm. And he is the. It sounds. It's not as bad as it sounds, but
you keep calling people the phallus.
Yeah, I know. He is the phallus. In fact, if you think about it, the fact that Don Draper's real name is Dick is kind of interesting. Anyway, so in this scene, William is the phallus. He's kind of like he's he's the good son, but he's not very effective. And Betty's the one who's kind of like, you know, I want this, and she's really demanding, and she's like very much like her father. And I think what's really funny for me in the scene is this whole Jardinier thing. You know that I said there's like 3 different types of lack, and there's like 3 different agents. Well, there's 3 different objects as well in correspondence.
Yes, I did.
Right. Okay. So there's like 3 different. So there's 3 different objects as well. So there's an imaginary object. There's a real breast, which we can get to in a second, and then there's a symbolic phallus, right? And the symbolic phallus in this sense is the Jardinier, right? So that kind of suggests that this is like some sort of real privation. What I'm saying is basically, I think I think in this scene, Betty basically is taking on the role of her father really slowly. So she's kind of like trying to, it's all that identification stuff and all that kind of stuff. And the reason we see the picture of her mother is because it's almost like at the beginning of the scene, she's kind of playing around with the idea of being the mother, but it doesn't quite fit with her. Yeah, so is there anything you want to say about this scene? Because I feel like I'm just rambling.
Not really. It's just her moaning that she didn't get a vase or whatever.
Well, yeah,
really?
I guess there's that thing, and there is this idea of demand.
It's entitlement, isn't it? Inheritance.
Well,
What does she get?
Exactly. So the next time we see them, I guess the best scene for me is they go back to see Don and Judy playing with the jigsaw. And this is kind of, I think this is full of imagery and sort of ideas and stuff.
Glossed over it.
You glossed over it. Well, it's like I think it's a really quick scene of like them just kind of, talking about lack. They're sort of like putting these pieces into like this, which is a massive lack. It's like a big sort of like image with like a big chunk out of it. And Don's obviously the two of them are almost, talking about adoption, the two of them are almost like trying to be adopted by what's his name, by Eugene. They're trying to be as good as they can, and obviously Don's trying to be as good as he can, but he can't actually get that far because Eugene doesn't like him. And it's interesting that when Betty comes back, Eugene's going crazy and he's like screaming and shouting at him and stuff, and Betty just tells him to stop, and he stops. And it's like, I think in that moment, it's kind of like Betty kind of takes on the traits of her father, and it kind of fits with her to the point where, they all leave and go and get lunch or dinner or whatever, which you could say more stuff about, but I won't. But they all go and get dinner, and when then Don's like, what does he say? He says, let's he's trying to be all sort of manly about it and everything, and she just tells him no one's around, you don't have to pretend.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, I think in that moment she takes on the fact, like you can tell she doesn't like Don in that moment, and it's very much like her father not liking Don as well. It's like she's kind of taken on those traits of her dad, which I think is really, really cool. But you glossed over it, so.
Well, also the beginning. Like I remember the end.
Okay.
With her, because he's trying to comfort her, isn't he?
Yeah.
And he
has no people.
She doesn't want to be comforted.
What do you think about him saying he has no people?
Well, he doesn't really.
But I think that goes back to this idea of lack, doesn't it? It's literally, I think that's the point, is because it never gets mentioned when he says it, because it stands out I've seen this show a couple of times, and it's one of the scenes that stands out to me all the time, is this idea of Eugene shouting that at Don, and like not really understanding the context of it, and like why, but it really just stick in the brain. And I just think the the strength of it, of him saying it, is because Don never speaks about it, and it's this idea that, you know, we all have this lack, and we should talk about this lack, because if we don't, the fact that we don't is kind of a bit weird, because it's almost like, why isn't this person talking about their feelings? Why isn't this person being a bit more open? You kind of view that person with suspicion, which is exactly how Eugene views Don. It's kind of this kind of not really sure what to make of him thing, so he doesn't really trust him around his daughter. Yeah, I think that's, and again, just the fact that he tries to be really sort of helpful to Betty again, and she tells him to, you know, sling his up. But yeah, so that's the end of that scene. Anything to add?
No.
No, okay. I feel like I'm just doing other talking.
Wait until we get to Glenn.
Okay.
Then it's Helen's time to shine.
All right. Okay. Okay. So this is my favorite scene in the whole thing.
The bedroom.
The bedroom.
So right, let's talk about the bedroom, because is it a dream?
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good.
So because I was like, because it's the way it's filmed is quite interesting.
Mm-hmm.
He's making up the bed on the floor.
Yep.
And then it changes to like dark, and then she just gets out of bed, lies on top of him, starts kissing him, and then they fuck, and then he wakes up and she's not there.
Yeah.
And you're like,
pretty much happens.
Was that a dream? And I think he almost doesn't know, even towards, because I think he sort of assumes that it happened, and that means that they're back to normal because they had sex.
Exactly.
So in his head, because women only want to have sex with you when they're in love with you.
Yeah. And I think it depends on whose point of view you're looking at it. I agree. And I think my read on this scene is that the whole kind of scene from beginning to end, to him waking up, so them going into the bedroom, and then is kind of like, it's like a little microcosm of their relationship, where, you know, they go home, they meet each other, they go on a date or whatever, they tear each other's clothes off, or they sort of get dressed really, they get naked really, really quickly. And then you see that weird shot where you see the shot of her, where she's on the bed, she's above him, and he's in this, like, on this towel, and his rags on the floor, and it's kind of like, and she physically goes down to meet him, so it's like, you know, if you think about their relationship, like, that's kind of what happened, where she's kind of,
she's an uptown girl.
What's
living in an uptown world.
Slumming it. That's
but
the
she never had a backstreet guy.
that's it, exactly what that's exactly what I'm seeing it as. Where she's kind of slumming it with him, and she's kind of like trying something out, and she's not entirely sure she wants to be with him, but stuff happens and they end up in a relationship together. And the end of their relationship is basic, and if you look at it from Don's point of view, it is like a dream, right? It's like he's this poor kind of wretched guy. He's kind of like from literally the dirt. He's been treated like crap all his life, and he's like, and then this supermodel woman comes and sort of whisks him away, sort of thing. And it's like, it's interesting that she does all the sort of moves, and she kind of like, you know, she makes she's the one that kind of makes it happen, sort of thing. Yeah, so that's kind of how I saw it as well, where it's almost like, from her point of view, it's her sort of like slumming it and sort of getting down and dirty with the farm boy or whatever.
Right. So it's like a whole Mills and Boon novel.
And from his point of view, it's like, you know, the light of success is shining down upon him, sort of thing. And then he wakes up and it was a dream, and it's like, now it's over. And it's interesting that he wakes up and he's kind of like, did that happen, sort of thing. It's like, and yeah, you're right, the character's thinking, are we back together? But I think you could also read it as the fact that it was a dream and now it's over, sort of thing. And I'm waking, and also,
I guess so.
Also, the fact that he wakes up in this bedroom, this child's bedroom, with all the child paraphernalia around him. It's almost like he was very immature when they got together, and now he's like still in that immature state. and she's kind of just left him, and he's like has to fend for himself, sort of thing.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And it gets a bit deeper when we talk
like
about
that.
Glenn later on.
Oh god.
And then I guess we've got this breakfast scene where this one's a bit. I guess the point of this scene for me was the fact that Betty's kind of. Is she the daughter? Is she the mother? Who is she in this role? And what? I think it's really interesting that as she's smoking, they say to Gloria says to her,
You get wrinkles.
You get wrinkles, yeah. And it's kind of like the idea that she's still quite young, sort of thing. And it's a very similar thing that remember ages ago.
Go on, no, you go.
Well, I was gonna say, you remember ages ago in Red in the Face when Roger.
I think it's replaced Indian Summer now as the most referenced episode ever.
When Roger was smoking and Cooper told him off for smoking, and he told him that story about Hitler and how Hitler hid some guy's cigarettes and it made him do all kinds of stuff. And I think that's kind of, if you think about, and it's almost like in that scene, Cooper is his dad telling him what to do and stuff. And I think it's a very similar scene here, whereas Betty comes across as quite young now, as opposed to.
But it's all relative though, isn't it? Because I mean, if you're in your 60s or 70s, like being in your 30s is young.
Yeah, true.
Do you know what I mean?
True, but I think it's more kind of referencing the fact that she just slept with Don, and like I said, Don wakes up in this. I think she's still quite immature as well from that point of view as well, and the show's telling us that she's quite immature. Sorry, what were you saying?
No, just that, but it's all relative, really. I mean, isn't it interesting that he wakes up? I mean, I didn't come up with this. You said it first, but he wakes up in a room full of toys.
Yeah.
And she's being lectured about starting to look old.
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah, that's kind of, and then he comes down and is offered waffles.
Yeah.
And she's eating fucking grapefruit, and I was like, I'd be fuming. Like, I came down and there was grapefruit, and then they offered my brother waffles or whatever.
It's also interesting that they offered Don like lots of stuff, and he just says, "No, I'm happy with what I've got," sort of thing. And he just kind of just leave me alone. I'm fine. Just happy to be there, sort of thing. So we see the interest. I'm not gonna go into it because it's too confusing. But there's this whole thing where the dad kind of one minute he talks to. We still got Glenn to go. Hold on to that. Right?
I know.
Hold on to that.
I know. Well, apparently this is the third of 4, so there's a whole other narrative to go.
We'll skim through Dot. But the fact that Betty is she at one point she's the wife of her dad. Well, symbolically she's his wife, right? And the next point, she is symbolically is his daughter again, and it's all really confusing. And to me, that's really a representation of her mental state, as opposed to what's going on in the scene, where she doesn't know which one she is. She's kind of confused. And what's really interesting about the end of the scene is the fact that because she's so confused, Don has to comfort her, and I think that's kind of. The shot kind of slows down and it looks quite ominous, and it's like she's in a really precarious point there where she could literally end up going back to him because she doesn't know what to do. But what happens is Viola comes to save the day, and we see like the scene. Did you have anything to say about this scene?
I mean, just really liked her.
She's
awesome.
So again, I'm gonna try and skim over this Lacanian thing, but the idea that you've got like an imaginary mother, you've got a real mother, and you've got a symbolic mother. So the imaginary mother is what's her name? Gloria. Yep, Gloria. And the real mother is her mother, who's dead. And then you've got the symbolic mother, who does all of this stuff, and the symbolic mother kind of reflects Betty's kind of frustration and the fact that she doesn't really know what to do and she's kind of confused. And it's interesting when she's talking to Betty about her father. Did you get the double thing of like she could also be talking about Don as well?
No.
Where she says like he's, what does she say? Oh god, I lost it now. It's gonna take another 15 minutes for me to find. Where she said she basically she says he doesn't know who I am and he's very very sick and all this kind of stuff. And to me, she could easily be talking about how, you know, she could easily be talking about Don. She could easily be talking about either one of them. And it's, to me, and it's that idea again of like of transference and of how she takes on Viola's kind of strength in a way when she's got, you know, she kind of, you know, talking about vulnerability. She's like floodgates are open. She's crying her eyes out and stuff, and it's like she takes that on. So when we get to the next scene, which is them at the door to the house, Don says he'll go upstairs and
Have a shower,
and all that kind of stuff. And she tells him no. And she tells him, you know, you have to leave. And I thought that was a really good conversation as well, because there's so many kind of like cool things. I don't want to go through them because it's just, there's too much. But even in that little sort of like, was it like minute and a half like scene, there's so many little things that they say. Like for instance, he says, I think, Don says to Betty, I think I should be here for you. And Betty says, she says, that's your reason. But if you read it a different way, she could be saying it in a way like that's your reason. As if to say like he's just making excuses to stay and stuff. And there's other things that they say. Look, the coolest line I think in that whole thing is, we were just pretending. And I think it kind of brings back that idea of them in bed and him waking up alone and all that kind of stuff. It's this kind of, and in the toy house, and sort of it's her sort of like trying something out and it just went a bit too far, sort of thing. So I really like that scene. I think it's really cool. I think there's so much in it, but I think we should rush on before you pass out. So then we move on to, I guess we start talking about Glenn then.
Glenn.
Oh, before we start, I just want to talk about the little scene that happens beforehand where Betty's all by herself.
Okay.
And it's this idea of lack and like isolation. It's like she kind of, so emotionally or thematically, she's kind of told Don to go away and now she's kind of alone. And the only thing she's got with her is the dog. You know, like dogs were used in that scene ages ago when Rachel was talking about how she uses dogs to kind of protect her emotionally, and like I think the dog is protecting, and that's all she's got though. She's kind of like locked herself in this tower or this house on her own, and you know, this whole, like I said, the fact that there's nothing else there, it's just her, and it literally a representation of lack. And then next day she goes out and she sees Glenn in the toy house.
In the Wendy house.
In the Wendy house, yeah.
He'd been just hanging out for 3 days.
Yeah. So.
God knows where he's been pooping.
Yeah, because we can go through.
Well, I mean, it's fairly obvious, isn't it? It's the whole thing is about Wendy house. It's about this house that was built, and it's all pretend. And it's very much, and she goes along with it. Like with Glenn, you can kind of see her going along with it.
It's like emotionally, she is the same age as Glenn in terms of relationships, right? Well, maybe not, but maybe a bit older. But yeah, and Glenn's there waiting for her. Again, this is to me, Glenn. In this scene, Glenn is basically done as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting one because you could also say that Glenn is the kind of husband she wanted.
Yeah, totally, yeah.
Don to be.
Yeah, he's a perfect representation of Don.
Exactly.
He's the ideal ego. Is it the ideal ego?
But you can there's like a weird transition throughout it.
What do you mean?
Well, the thing is, it's almost like she slipped into it because there's a safety in a role, like in a daughter.
Yes.
mother, wife. And I think, you know, we established quite a lot in season 1 that this was the life that she was supposed to have as this kind of housewife.
Yeah.
And she found it fucking boring.
Yeah.
But actually, you know, suddenly Glenn's looking at her through these lens of like this perfect wife, this perfect woman, and she wants to be that because, and it's about it's the role you fulfill. It's exactly what Viola said to her, which is, you know, you go back to your husband and your family, and you have to do that thing because that's what you do.
They're yours.
And this is what, you know, everyone's got their place, and that's that. And it's kind of like with Glenn, it's really she makes him she puts Don's clothes on him, and then she makes him a sandwich.
There's a joke. I think there's a joke in this scene, in part of this scene, that I think is fucking hilarious to me anyway. Where when they go into the house, he says, "Can I use your toilet?" And then she says, "Yeah, I'll just go and put your clothes. Do you want me to put your clothes in the laundry?" Right? And the fact that they do that is a bit weird because the only time we've seen, every time we see someone in the toilet, or the only time we saw Glenn in the toilet was when he was watching Betty and he was kind of getting his rocks off. And we also saw Pete in the toilet getting his rocks off.
What lovely visuals.
And then the fact that, and it's specifically because Betty says, "I'll do some laundry as well," because that reminds me of
So filthy. I don't know. All he ever goes on about is phalluses and people getting their rocks off in the toilet.
And to me, it's like this whole scene. Like I'll just say it. Like I think this whole thing from her meeting Glenn to literally them, like Glenn going off with Helen, or Glenn going off with the kids even, is basically a relationship. It's like it's marriage. It's like from dating all the way to having kids and it's like literally a whole marriage in the afternoon.
Yeah, totally. Because, and what's really interesting, skipping forward ahead slightly, is when what's the daughter called? Sally. When Sally comes in, she's like, "Okay, let's go wash up before dinner." Whereas with him, she's like, "Let me take your clothes." But it's very different. It's a very different vibe.
It is, yeah. Totally.
And then she's sitting there watching him eat his dinner.
Yes. Well,
and he's like, "Why aren't you eating?"
Yeah, and then he sort of feeds her, right? And there's like, I feel that there's a weird thing between food and sex where like, so, you know, speaking about Lacan again, there's this idea of, I tried to talk about it before, where you have this demand, actually fuck that. So the idea that food and sex are these two main drives that people have, right? And when you're a child, you sort of associate food with love, and when you get older, you associate sex with love, and they're kind of like the two of them sort of like together are kind of, I think they make a really good thing, and it's amazing how they managed to
what?
I think it's amazing. What do you mean?
Are you saying that Glenn and Betty are a good couple?
No, I'm not saying they're a good couple. I'm just saying it's really clever how they've managed to do this without making it too creepy. It's a bit weird, but it's not.
It's really not too creepy. It's hot. It's like really creepy. So creepy. And it only gets creepier as time goes on. Because then he's sitting on the sofa with her.
Yep. Holding hands. And she's got like a little Coke bottle or whatever, and she's like sucking out the straw. And then he's like, "I don't even like ham sandwiches." She's like, "Oh, do you want me to make you a mac and cheese?" And then he doesn't say anything, and it's like, I can't handle it. But I think that's the thing. So I think in this episode, it keeps coming up. The fact that there's a lot of pauses and a lot of like awkward situations, and it is, to me, it is the idea of there's a lack. This idea of lack, and every time there's a lack, then a character has to kind of grow from that. And I think Glenn, but I think both of them grow from this situation. But I love that when they're sitting on the thing and there is this kind of like awkward pause. It's like if you go back to this whole idea of Don and it's being an analogous to Don and Betty's relationship. When there's that pause, that's when the kids come into the house. And to me, thinking about their relationship, thinking about Don and Betty's relationship, it's like, okay, so they got married. You've gone out on lots of dates. We've had our fun. What do we do now? We could either split up or we could have kids, sort of thing. And it's kind of, you know what I mean? It's like how you end up sort of like in this situation where you're in this relationship with someone that you don't really know and you don't know why you're with them. You're just going through the motions. And I feel like when Sally and Bobby come through the door, that's kind of a representation of that. It's a representation of them having kids out of boredom from nothing else or out of a lack. So the kids come in and then Sally says, do you want to see the train station, right? And
train set, yeah.
The train set. So they go to the train set. I like the idea that they use the train set, right? Because it reminds me, and it's why I kind of thought of this being like a relationship between Betty and Don, like an analogous to that, because we remember in really early on in one of the earlier episodes, Don kind of freaks out when he when he's really bored in his family and he's like really sort of miserable because he's kind of, at the kids' party and all that kind of stuff. And then his answer to that is to go and stare at a train.
Oh yeah.
So it's kind of like, and he's literally going through the whole Don thing. And then we see like it cuts to this scene of you see Glenn sitting on a chair. It's Glenn sitting on a seat on a sofa, and actually before that happens, Betty phones up Helen, right? I wanted to say something about Carla as well, but I can't remember what it was. Anyway, the next scene is we see Glenn sitting on the sofa and we see Sally on the carpet, right? Which is really similar to the earlier scene with Don and Betty in bed. This time
Okay.
this time they're reversed, right? I was thinking, why would they do that? And it's almost like, to me, it's this thing of like, so if you think about how Betty's kind of learned how to deal, like, so when Betty was very young, she kind of like, she basically let Don do what he wanted because she was kind of quite insecure and wasn't really sure of herself. I think that's the show's kind of saying that girls kind of lack a bit of confidence when they're younger, so they will let boys kind of like be in the sofa. They'll let them go into the higher kind of. Is this making any sense?
Keep going.
Am I talking rubbish?
I mean, maybe.
So like, okay, so let me explain it better. So obviously when we see Don and Betty in that scene in bed, Betty's in this kind of like perfect, she's like in this really lofty position and Don's on the floor, right? And I think it's interesting that Sally lets Glenn onto the sofa, and remember, this is her house, so she really should be sitting on the chair and he should be on the floor.
I mean, I don't know if you can compare a scene about two adults with one about two kids.
Well, let's say.
I feel like that's a stretch for me.
All right, fair enough. Well,
it might not be for you, but it is for me.
Okay, fair enough.
I feel like with kids, they don't decide whether they're going to sit on the sofa based on like Freudian principles or whatever.
Well, yeah, obviously it's
set up.
heightened, but it's set up. But it's I'm not saying they thought about it.
Okay.
Anyway, I guess we'll just do the last part now. Well,
where Helen shows up.
Almost the last part, yeah, where Helen shows up. So
she's like, "You naughty boy, you get home right now."
Well, we can skim over all that bit. So she basically takes him away, and
he says, "I hate you," and she's
like,
"I know."
And this is kind of like, this to me is like Helen. No, not Helen. Sorry. This is to me is like Betty, a grown up. She's kind of, she doesn't care what people think about her. She knows what she has to do. She knows what the right thing to do is. She doesn't mind that he hates her because she knows that he's got somewhere else to go. I think she tells him something about they have to go home, and I think the word home kind of associates with sort of dealing with your own issues, right? And it happens a lot in this episode. And so she takes him away, and then she comes back, and then they have this weird conversation. And I thought this conversation was great.
Yeah, me too. I thought it was good.
And I think it kind of, all that stuff I was saying about vulnerability and sort of like lack and opening up, and I think it's all in that scene where, because it's quite, they're very sort of open with each other. Like, Helen's very angry, and they talk it out and they hash it out. And they're very open with how they feel. So when Helen says all that stuff to her, Betty then, there's a line that she says where Helen says, "I thought Dan was out of our lives and it'd be different."
Yeah.
Glenn's right. I'm not a good mother anymore. And if you change one letter in that entire thing, if you change Dan to Don, you basically, Betty could have said exactly the same thing.
I don't think Betty was ever a good mother. That's the difference.
Yeah, I know, but but the idea is there. The idea that the two of them in that moment are exactly the same person. And then to the point where, did you see the shot of them when they're both smoking? And they're both like
profile.
Perfect mirror images of each other. And then and then Betty sort of tells everything about how Don and then it becomes this whole thing of them just sharing how they feel. And then there's that thing about sometimes she feels like she'll float away if Don isn't holding her down. Cut to Don floating away.
Yeah. I didn't put that together. That's pretty good. We're almost finished. Yeah.
We're almost. Do you wanna?
No, I think that's a great line. That whole, because you can understand that. That's something that you can relate to, because the only reason is the anchors in our lives, like what the anchors are and how they keep us like in the spaces that we're in. So be it like a job, be it like, a marriage, be it a house, be it whatever it is. Without an anchor, without any reason. I mean, she has more than one anchor. She has children as well, but obviously she doesn't consider them to be very big anchors.
She's got a family. She's got a family, I guess. She's got a mum and she's got a dad and a brother. Don doesn't have anyone. And I think it's interesting that she says she thought that he was going to hold her down, and he's never been holding her down. She's always stopped him from floating away. It might even explain that thing about, remember the balloon that we were trying to figure out for ages?
No.
In Babylon, the red balloon, and we were sort of like, what does that represent?
Oh yeah, I think I vaguely remember that actually. But no, I think it's good. I think after all that, after going through those whole shenanigans, I think she finally figured something out. So, slow progress, but progress nonetheless.
It took a while to get
It only took a whole fucking episode of meetings and shit. Anyway,
we need to talk about Dawn quickly.
Let's talk about Dawn.
I think the only thing I really want to say about Dawn is because I feel like we've glossed over the whole the whole party thing. So when he turns up at the office and it's all really quiet, and then he goes into the big thing, and there's like the big the baby shower. I think that's quite significant as well. The fact that I keep trying to talk about this thing. Demand minus need equals desire, right? So what that kind of means is demands that you, as a baby, you sort of cry for things.
Yeah.
Then you get what you need, and it might be food, it might be, but then along with that comes this thing that you can't really articulate, which generally tends to be love. And then in this scene, you've got Harry with a baby thing on his face, and they're giving him all these presents, while at the same time there's this whole, as much as cynical as that office is, you can tell that everyone cares about him to some point. You know, they're all laughing and joking about him. I think it's a representation of that. And also in that scene, you've got that cake, which kind of also represents like some sort of desire. Also represents the kind of love, to the point where at the end of the whole thing, Joan says, "Can I have some of that cake?" When she's sort of like told Paul he's not going on the trip. What else is in this scene? And then you've got the whole thing with Cooper turning up. I feel like I'm just talking now, but I feel like we need to get this out of the way.
I feel like I don't really remember that scene.
You don't remember the scene at all? That's like a massive scene for me.
Well, I mean, you could say
it's quite late
they
on.
They have a party in pretty much every episode, so
okay.
It's just this one happened to be a baby shower.
Fair enough. You got this weird. So there's one more thing I want to say about the whole scene before we move on. So I think this whole first scene specifically, the first half of this scene is very much about. So very much about patriarchy, right? And it's very much about how all of us, man, woman, whoever we are, we all inherit this kind of patriarchy. We all inherit this kind of. We're born into this world where being a man is seen as some sort of, you know, for some reason it's seen as some sort of like good thing as opposed to being a woman, especially at that time in those days, right? And there's just this whole thing of like the suggestion that this baby might be a kid, that might be a boy. Do you know what I mean? And it's like there's never a suggestion that it could be a girl. I think that's kind of what all the little signs in the scene are kind of trying to point towards, and the whole thing on the cake that says "it's a crane," which is kind of like obviously a label, and it's like telling you exactly what the baby is before you've even seen what the baby is. It's kind of very much the whole Playboy thing with the Playboys, and it's all very kind of.
But that's the thing. That's the joke that they're making, isn't it? They've put a grown man in a bonnet, and he's going to be a father.
Yeah.
It's
even very they're sort of like they're celebrating the father as opposed to the mother, and it's all very much about him, and it's very, very male dominated, which I thought was.
But it's not even male. It's also, like I say, a grown man in a baby bonnet. Like they're basically visualizing what they're trying to say, which is that these men are babies.
Oh yeah,
having kids themselves.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, totally.
So yeah.
And I guess, you're right. The men as children, and then we see the scene with Don, and he goes into the room with Joan, and Joan is very much his mother in that scene, and she's very looking after him and all that kind of stuff. And I guess then we can kind of just end the whole thing by talking about the final scene, where Don's floating away.
Smoking on the plane.
Well, Don's basically doing what Bobby did, right? Glenn did, and like running away from his problems. He's been rejected by Betty, and now he's kind of running away and sort of like just trying to get away from his problems and stuff. What's interesting is, the song at the end. It's called Telstar. I can't remember the guy's name. It's by this producer. Thing is, the producer put the song out, and then he was sued, so the song got held back, and he made millions and millions of dollars off it, but he couldn't have them because he got sued. So then he killed himself, and then it turned out he didn't need to get sued in the first place.
Oh no, that's awful.
Yeah, so, and I think it's kind of reflecting on Don's kind of this idea of lack and not appreciating what you've got, and not until it's too late. If that makes any sense. I could probably go into more detail, but I won't. Does that click?
So what's Don's lack then?
Well, the fact that Don doesn't really kind of appreciate that he has, like, he just runs away from his problems. He doesn't tell anyone about those problems. He doesn't open up about them to anyone. So he's like, in effect, he is running away from his problems, and he's just like a ticking time bomb. Anything could happen with him. Like I said, this guy committed suicide, right? I don't want to spoil anything. But
I mean, we still have like 5 more seasons, right? So
I feel like this kind of, I feel like it's quite an ominous thing to finish the song, to finish the episode on that tune. But yeah, that's the episode. Don't know if you have anything that you want to add. It's just been me talking for.
no, like I say, I mean, I just personally I didn't really enjoy the episode. Like, it just felt very like. I mean, sometimes here's the thing, right? Sometimes, to me, if all this subtext that you're saying was there and was built in to be there, sometimes I feel like they should have just focused on the story.
Right. Okay.
For the dumb nuts like me, who were just like, I mean, it was just, as I say, the Glenn bit was interesting just because it was weird.
Yeah.
And the dream bit I quite liked because it was like, oh, that's interesting. But the rest of it, like watching someone do a jigsaw. I mean, come on. As someone who used to work in television, like, that shit would not fly.
Fair enough.
But, you know, I mean, all I can say is I hope it picks up a little bit. I hope.
Okay, well.
Here's my hope.
Yeah.
I hope that Betty just turns into, like, an absolute, you know, I just want to say,
dragon.
I want to say slut.
Right.
I'm not slut shaming because I feel like I want her to go out and have a good time.
Right. Okay. Interesting.
I want her to slag about a bit.
Okay.
He's been slagging about.
Yes, he has.
It's her turn.
Fair enough. I say nothing.
But I also think she's just a bit unstable.
Yep.
I feel like she could turn into a serial killer.
They're all a bit unstable, let's be honest.
Yeah, but I mean, who holds hands with a 12-year-old boy and watches cartoons? Like, that's just fucking weird.
I think, metaphorically, it gave things an ending, let's just say that.
That it did.
I think that's it. I think we've... I just want to say, like, because we talked about ages ago, way back when, we were talking about whether we thought this show was feminist. It just keeps going through my head, and this was off air. We didn't talk about this on it, and you just made a really good point that you didn't think it was.
No,
and I kind of agree with you.
I don't think it is. Now there's an interesting thing there because I can understand why some people would think that it was.
Yeah.
It really depends on what your view of what feminism is.
Yeah.
And I think that is really disparaging. And the reason I say that is because I recently went to a book group where we read a book that was declared a feminist book, and I did not think that it was a feminist book. And I went to this book group and was like, this isn't a feminist book. She spends the whole book talking about a man. Like, how is this feminist? And it's set in like the Greek tragedy era, whatever the hell that was. Like, and there was a woman there who said, yeah, but feminism isn't necessarily about being the hero. You don't have to be Xenia, warrior princess, to be a feminist.
Yeah.
Just like feminism can be about endurance of like the conditions that women went through. But I still don't feel like Mad Men is a feminist show.
Keeping in mind, we just had a whole episode about a woman breaking free.
But that's not what feminism is. And also, she doesn't just break free. It's almost like she can't. I feel like Betty doesn't know what she wants.
Yeah.
But Betty also relies on other people. So yeah, at the end, she's gone. She's told her something. She hasn't actually done anything herself, though.
Okay.
I feel like.
The only reason I bring it up is because, I kind of agree with you. I kind of agree that it's not necessarily a feminist, full-on feminist show. I feel like it's a bit, but I think it works in a specific way that it encompasses feminism. If that makes any sense.
No, I see. No, I can. There are elements definitely, but I think I would not call it a feminist show.
Specific, yeah. Okay, fair enough. I just wanted to put that in there. just to annoy people. Anyway, I think, is that it? Are we done?
I think we are.
Okay.
I think we've managed to put Elton to sleep.
Yeah, it's a bit late now.
I'm really sorry about the first half, everyone. I can only apologise for my 10-week-old kitten.
Wow. Yeah, that was fun. I guess it's just
have fun editing.
It's just time for me to say. What do I say? I forgot.
Sopranos is better.
There you go.
Thank you.
There we go. We've done it. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Speak to you later.